Hey guys, TigerTrot23 here. A friend of mine has recently been having some great success with some of his YouTube videos, so he recommended I make some videos about some of the stuff that I do, so I thought I'd share with you some of the cool records that I found over the weekend while going to yard sales here in the Gulf Coast of Florida. I stopped at about 10 sales and a couple thrift stores at the end of the afternoon, and 3 of the sales had records and 2 of them had good records, so here's what I found. The first place I stopped, the woman had 3 boxes of LPs and 1 box of 45s, all $1 each, as well as a Technics turntable which I bought. And I was looking through the albums. They were mostly common 70s singer-songwriter stuff like James Taylor, even some Barbra Streisand, but anyway, I was going through and I was really happy when I found these. This is a Leonard Cohen album called Live Songs from 1973, and this is the album that came out after that, New Skin for the Old Ceremony from 1974. Live Songs is really cool because unlike some of his earlier albums that have either very bombastic orchestral production or very sparse production, this one has some great live energy and has a nice stripped down band, which really kind of bring out some of the lyrics and motifs of his songs. It's especially evident on my favorite song here, Bird on the Wire, where usually Leonard Cohen's known for his low vocal range, low-key singing style, kind of like Lou Reed, but on Bird on the Wire he really lets loose and gets into the higher register of his voice, so it's really cool. This one, not too many people know about it, maybe because it doesn't have his face on it like all his other albums, and it's not called Songs of This or Songs of That, but anyway, this one's from 74, has a little bit of ring wear, and the previous owner wrote their name on it, but the disc is in great shape on the Columbia label. And the first song on here is really cool. You should check it out. It's called Is This What You Wanted, and has a similar arrangement to the live album with some different instrumentation than he usually uses. He even plays the juice harp, and Janis Ian sings backup on a couple songs. And not too many people know about this, but her debut album when she was only a teenager from 67 is a pretty cool psychedelic sort of acid rock almost feel with some controversial political lyrics that are really cool for someone her age and of that year. It's produced by Shadow Morton, who did the Vanilla Fudge album and also did the Shangri-Las, so that one's a pretty cool one to check out too. Anyway, I went to another sale and I found this album, a 1950s or late 60s, early 60s on the Capitol label. It's a Mickey Katz album called Mishmash, and what initially intrigued me was the album cover. I noticed he's holding a saxophone and there's a clarinet here too. I thought maybe it was just going to be comedy or stand-up, but actually it turned out to be pretty funny. Musical comedy, parody, almost kind of like proto Weird Al. He does Yiddish klezmer parodies of popular hits of the day, like 16 Tons, where he sings about a delicatessen, and That's Amore, which he changed the lyrics to That's Morris, and it's in a fun klezmer style, which is a Jewish European traditional folk music, which has its own silliness anyway. So this album is pretty cool. It has some fun wordplay and puns, and it's on the Capitol Rainbow Swirl Band logo, which the Beatles would eventually be on their American releases. It's a slightly earlier variation with the deep groove in the label. If you haven't heard of the deep groove, it doesn't refer to the grooves of the record, but actually this indentation here in the label itself. A lot of Blue Note records are known for that, and other early jazz labels like Prestige, and basically it tells you that it's an early or original pressing, which was pressed on thicker, higher quality vinyl. rather than some of the later 70s like Dynaflex that Dave Bowie and other guys were on. I also found this one at that other sale. It's Ennio Morricone soundtrack called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is a movie featuring Clint Eastwood, one of the best Western movies of all time. I recently watched it myself, and his music really does enhance the imagery of the film and turn some scenes very emotional too. Probably the song that you know from this, even if you haven't heard of the composer or the album or the film, you've probably heard is the most classic Western theme. And that's just one of the many interesting melodies on this album. Also, another song that I really like is called The Ecstasy of Gold, which I've been hearing a lot lately on television and commercials for beer. It's a very cool song with a nice moving chord progression that kind of evokes some of the imagery of the final scene in which the song was used, kind of an epic sort of song. And it has another one of the hallmarks of Ennio Morricone's music, which is his use of the human voice as an instrument. On that song, lead female singer sings the wordless melody, and it just enhances the overall mood of the song. Then I went to a thrift store and I found this album. What intrigued me about this was the album cover and the label design, as well as the low quality illustrations and writing on the back. So it turns out that this one is what's called a private press album, which means it's not on a major label. It was probably only pressed locally in Slidell, New Orleans, Louisiana, for their friends and fans and family. Maybe only 50 or 100 copies of this even exist, and it's very rare, so you probably won't see this one too much. Unfortunately, I was hoping based on the artwork that it would be psychedelic or hippie sort of music, but it was pretty much just bluegrass, and there is some good bluegrass, maybe even historical, culturally important American music on the Smithsonian Folkways label, but this one turned out to be not so great. Then I moved on and found this one. It's on the Caedmon label, which is known for releasing spoken word and readings of poems or short stories. This one's a double album, gatefold, of a Japanese theater play. The genre is Noh, N-O-H, and I was really happy when I listened to this because it wasn't just spoken word, it was also fully scored and arranged with some very unique traditional music and singing styles of Japan. And I think some of this may have been influential on some of Yoko Ono's singing techniques too, a very raw and emotional sort of style, which some people I know found a little bit grating when juxtaposed with the Beatles rock and roll music. But if you haven't heard it, you should definitely check out her debut album from 1970. It's called Yoko Ono Plastic Ono Band, and it was released concurrently with John Lennon's album of the same name. And her album features the same musicians, John Lennon on guitar, Klaus Voormann on bass, and Ringo Starr on drums. And believe me, you've never heard them play like this. It's very ahead of its time, very avant-garde. There's even an Ornette Coleman feature on one song. And I think it's almost like proto-punk, proto-post-punk, because it sounds so much like what Public Image Limited and other bands would do almost 10 years later. So you should check that one out. I'll post a link in the description. I also found this on the same label. It's Gertrude Stein reading some of her works, and the cover is not in the best of shape, but the disc was fine, and it's a pretty interesting historical work of literature here, and could be good for sampling or other stuff like that too. And I also found this compilation on the Folkways label of some of the earliest recordings ever made. It's a compilation of Edison cylinders, and I don't have a way to play those, and even if I did, it's probably a good idea to preserve them. So finding something like this can give you a chance to listen to some of those very early historic recordings, some of them even from like 1903, 1904, so over 100 years old. This particular pressing is from the late 50s or early 60s, and it's in great shape. 1961. So after that, I kept looking, and at the thrift store I found a pretty nice collection of some classic rock stuff. A lot of common stuff I already had, but I got to a small area where I found some great stuff. So here's the first one, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, original US pressing, gatefold. One of the most popular albums they did, and most popular rock albums of all time, from 1973. It also had the original pyramid poster insert, the band poster, and also I was really happy to find these. You don't see them too much. The original stickers that came with it. No one has even touched these or stuck them on anything. Sometimes you see them stuck to the front of the album cover, but these ones were in great shape. They're the fasten printing press variety. Unfortunately, this one got stuck in the gatefold, so it has a little bit of damage, but otherwise, overall, in great shape. And being the complete package, I'm happy to have found all of this together. I'll be giving it to a friend who's been looking for one for a while. I already have my own copy, a UK original with all the inserts, as well as a UK quadraphonic pressing. If you haven't heard of quadraphonic, it was a pretty unique 70s early surround sound system with a front left, front right, rear left, and rear right speaker arrangement and mix. And Pink Floyd were kind of pioneers of this because they used a similar system in their shows in the late 60s with a device called the Azimuth Coordinator, which would allow them to make swirling sound effects like footsteps appear to be going around the concert hall. I also found this, probably my favorite of the later Pink Floyd albums. It's called Animals from 1977, with a pretty cool label design and the original lyric sleeve. It's also a gatefold, and it's in great shape, and probably my favorite song on that is Dogs. Just pure Pink Floyd with some great arrangements, chords, lyrics, and melodies, and solos too. I also found The Wall, the classic double album from '79 with the gatefold, the original lyric sleeves, and the art labels in great shape too. And all of these were only $1 each. And that brings me to this last one, which was kind of hiding behind everything else. It's also by Pink Floyd. It's called Floyds of London, which is a play on words from the Lloyds of London insurance company. And I think you might not have heard of this one before. Maybe you never saw it on a t-shirt or in a catalog of their discography. And that's because this is actually an unofficial release. It's technically illegal. I shouldn't own it. The thrift store shouldn't have sold it to me. I think at this point, though, 30 or 40 years since it came out, there's not too many people going after collectors. But it's not for sale on Discogs anymore. Basically, this is what's known as a bootleg or a royo, recording of illegitimate origin. And it was made by fans to share some of the interesting live versions of the songs that they were doing at the time. One of the first bootlegs that ever came out was Bob Dylan, Great White Wonder, from I think 68 or 69, and there's songs on that he hasn't even released today. This album came out I think in 73 or 74, and it was recorded off of a live radio broadcast that someone taped from the BBC in 71. It has a couple cool songs, Fat Old Sun, One of These Days, and also Echoes from the Metal album. And this version is pretty good. It's recorded pretty well since it's coming from a radio BBC broadcast. However, I was disappointed at the end because it faded out early. And that could be because this bootleg label, which is called CBM, with this little pirate guy, that stands for Contraband Music. This bootleg label, as far as I've seen, is actually a bootleg of a bootleg label. One of the main bootleg labels of the late 60s and throughout the 70s was called TMOQ, which stands for Trademark of Quality. And they would have people go out to concerts with tape recorders and make live recordings of band shows, or even somehow get their hands on some unreleased outtake stuff, like on the Bob Dylan album or the Beatles' 1969 bootleg called Come Back, which I think sold hundreds of thousands of copies at the time. This label, however, not Trademark of Quality, which has a pig logo, this pirate guy, seems like they quite possibly bootlegged a bootleg to release this, so could be doubly illegal. But anyway, I have a feeling that these recordings have already been legally released at this point, perhaps on the Pink Floyd early years box set. Anyway, it's in pretty good shape, and if it was legal to sell, it probably would be worth at least $20 or $30, considering the condition. And overall, I was very happy with everything else that I found today, over the weekend. If you add it all up, I only spent about $10 on records and $30 on that turntable, which hopefully I'll be able to clean up and get working soon. But overall, I would conservatively estimate that these records are worth probably $100, if not more. So I'll post in the description a link to the Discogs page for each of these titles, and if you want to see what I find next week, just post a comment and subscribe. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. I should mention that bootlegs such as the one I found over the weekend are still being made and are still illegal. And for good reasons, too. I mean, the artists themselves may not want this material to be released for whatever reason they choose. They have the right to decide what gets released and what doesn't. And in addition to that, the bigger problem is that they are not getting any of the royalties from the sale of these bootlegs. Whether it's a bootleg of live or unauthorized recordings, or even a bootleg reissue like so many are being made today, an unofficial release. I know, for example, the singer and keyboard player from a 60s duo called Silver Apples, very cool electronic, early electronic music. Their album has since been legally licensed and re-released, but a few years before that, there was a bootleg reissue circulating around on a label called Phoenix, which seems to be notorious for illegally reproducing 60s and 70s psychedelic albums and not giving any of the money to the original artists themselves who deserve it. And that's just one real-life consequence. You can also see a contemporary example to the 70s bootleg era, where in a video that I'll post in the description, Neil Young goes into a record shop and finds some bootlegs of his stuff that he didn't authorize the release of, and for which he was not getting any money. And so he did what he was authorized to do and walked out of the store with them. So I'll post that too. It's pretty entertaining.